まあこれいいと思うよ。これもいいし、でもこれってどうなる
？And to be fair, I'd forgive you for thinking that at first glance. Dino Crisis, initially released on the PlayStation 1 in 1999, was the first panic horror game from Capcom Production Studio 4, led by Resident Evil series legend Shinji Mikami. Today, we're playing the Dreamcast version that was released a year later because, are you new around here? I sort of have a thing for Sega's final console. By the way, if you're new around here, subscribe! And no, I did not misspeak. This game was intended to launch a new subgenre in horror games, dubbed panic horror. The idea would be that it would be kind of a yin to the survival horror yang. To explain that better, let's introduce the game. After being briefed on your mission, which is to extract the rather valuable and supposedly deceased Dr. Kirk by a man on the inside, Tom, 4 Special Forces agents from SORT are dropped on a remote island. 3 of them, Regina, Gale, and Rick, regroup on the island shore, while the 4th, needless to say, we won't be hearing from him anytime soon. It's kind of hard to not draw comparisons to the opening of 1996's Resident Evil, and I get it. It's a very similar vibe. You've got a team being dropped in, one of them doesn't make it because they're killed by some kind of monster before they even get to the target. However, these guys don't know that Cooper, the 4th agent, is dead. Hell, they don't even know really what's going on, just that they found the base they have to infiltrate and that the power is out. You, the player, take on the role of Regina and go forward to investigate. Immediately, you'll notice that while this game does indeed use tank controls, unlike Resident Evil, you can aim and shoot while moving. Also, before any enemies, you encounter a battery puzzle that is significantly simpler than anything seen in Capcom's flagship series. And that's the thing. This game is an attempt at a more action-focused take on horror gameplay, and there's no real better way to demonstrate this than the combat. Shortly after the battery puzzle, Regina encounters the first Dinosaur, a rather hungry velociraptor that comes right at the player barreling over crates. It, like most of the enemies, is relatively easy to dispatch, but it does get the point about panic horror across. After the initial jump, the game is designed in such a way to get you to snap back into gear and deal with the situation presented to you. This philosophy is incredibly interesting, and it's clear how it had an influence on titles like Resident Evil Code Veronica, as well as Resident Evil 4. It's worth noting that this came out between Resident Evil 2 and 3, which should give us some insight into the creative place that Shinji Mikami was in at the time. The presentation is also super interesting. Gone are the dark, drab hallways of horror games past, and in are brightly lit, wide open areas. This could be part to accommodate the larger enemies, but it's also to emphasize that they're in-engine and not pre-rendered environments. The overall focus seems to be less on claustrophobia and more on acute environmental awareness and the steps the game takes to throw that through a loop. Sure, it can do the basics, like suddenly flip on you with a new camera angle, but the biggest way it does it is by having dinosaurs chase you from room to room. Do you think that you've got a breather? That you've got a moment to yourself? Wrong. That dinosaur you just ran past is still after you, and you've got to deal with it, no matter what. They are very clever girls. And it's not just the velociraptors that are tenacious little buggers. There's one really big bastard that's going to give you a ton of headaches. The T-Rex. Oh yes, this absolute son of a bitch is here to ruin your day and eat you for dinner. In lieu of multiple bosses, this Big Bertha runs into you multiple times, and it's an event every time it shows up. Partly because, well, it's a bloody thunder lizard, but also because it is always a rather abrupt difficulty spike. The first time you come face to face with him is when Regina finds their man on the inside, Tom, bleeding out in an office. The Tyrannosaur comes bursting through and, oh, well, I died there. It's a simple matter of timing, but getting it right is a bit of a curve. What's nice though is that there's items called resuscitations that bring you right back to 100% health with no penalty. On the off chance you haven't got one handy, the game also offers unlimited saves at set safe rooms, but with the catch that the player just gets 5 continues. It is remarkably fair, but it doesn't really offset the frustration of the T-Rex fights. Like I said, the problem is timing. All of them, barring one, require well-timed shots to the SOB's mouth. Mess up, and it's chomp time. Getting this right can be a little finicky, but it's not a huge issue. What is, however, is getting the shot lined up in time before you get turned into Dino dung, especially in the second encounter. After realigning a satellite in order to try and call the extraction helicopter, Regina is chased by the beast to a locked door. The actual chase? It's not so bad. The moment at the door when you can't see what you're shooting at and you have to turn around in time just to get a perfectly timed shot off to save yourself? A huge pain in the ass. Ultimately, it's just a lot of trial and error until eventually you get the timing right. What's funny is that the battle almost immediately afterwards, when the T-Rex takes down that chopper, is, well, it's stupidly easy. It's so big, making spacing yourself away from it just not really much of a chore. And right before this, I found a grenade gun. Oh, that is another thing I should mention. Besides playing this on Dreamcast, I did also elect to play this on the easy difficulty. Not because I'm moonlighting for Dean Takahashi, but honestly because I was expecting a more typical kind of classic era horror game experience, and I wanted to get to know the map before going at it again on harder difficulties. This doesn't actually change much of anything in terms of the actual storyline, but what it does remix is weapon placements. So for example, instead of finding the shotgun at the quarterway point, I had it immediately, and I found the grenade launcher at about halfway through the game rather than right at the end. What lowering the difficulty didn't change though was the plot itself. Like I said before, Regina, Gale and Rick find themselves on the island, and after that raptor attacks, it's clear that things are not as they seem. The researchers supposedly working here are absent, or worse, dead. The security system has gone AWOL, and Dr. Kirk is nowhere to be seen. But what is around is a compelling series of breadcrumbs to what seems to be a bizarre experiment around MacGuffin Third Energy that has somehow ripped open time and space, bringing various dinosaurs from 65 million years ago to the present. It's a bit basic, but it does get the job done, and it does do a good job leaning into the gameplay at hand. It's worth reading every research memo you find, not just for the lore, but because it'll show you how to find secrets, codes for locks, and also how to solve the various DDK locks dotted around the place. It's not enough just to find the keys for those locks. Oh no, you've also got to work out a puzzle, you see. They're pretty straightforward if you read the instructions helpfully left of you, and you can honestly, guess most of them if you speed read it. Or, use a guide. What? It's 2021. You've got Google. What fascinates me here as well is the various choices the game gives you. Several times it lets you choose between a moral quandary presented by Rick and Gale. It can be something like focus on the mission or go and look for Cooper, but it gives a different route each time. And did I mention there are 3 endings to this game? I took what seemed like the most straightforward path, tending to agree with what made more sense at the time. Basically, I kind of thought that Gale was a complete knob jockey. Until these ending scenes, when he made just a teeny bit of sense. Still a knob jockey though. Speaking of those ending scenes, here's where the big plot twist happens. Through the entire thing, it's clear that Dr. Kirk has absolutely lost the plot, and, as it turns out, the government body that sent you in has zero interest in extracting him. Just, his research and data. Human lives, they're expendable, don't you know? Depending on the choices you made, you can either take him and the data, or just the data. Since I was very much sticking to the plan, I took both at the cost of Gale's life. Finally, making the final escape on a hovercraft, the T-Rex shows up for one last... swim? Damn, is that thing related to Michael Phelps? That hovercraft is flying at top speed, and fun fact, I grew up in Hyde, England, where Sir Christopher Cockerell developed and tested the modern notion of the hovercraft, meaning that a very enthusiastic primary school teacher drilled into me at a very young age some basic facts, like the hovercraft can hit about 70 miles an hour. The south of England is weird. Really, really weird. It's not as frustrating as the fight on the roof with the T-Rex, but timing is, again, essential. Also, really? Did I need to redo this shtick with shooting it in the mouth for a third time? Well, with a giant explosion, that right there is it. That's the game. I enjoyed my time with Dino Crisis. It was a brief romp. The whole thing took me about six and a half hours, and honestly, I kind of want to play it again, and I kind of want to check out the sequels. I can see now why there's a very passionate fan base kind of screaming at Capcom for a remake. This would hugely benefit from a modern makeover, and you can consider me among those voices now asking for it. It'd be great. Let's go. Just, if you do Capcom, change up the boss fights a bit more, and please have more than 3 types of regular dinosaurs to fight. There's raptors, slightly bigger, nastier raptors, pterodactyls, and, I guess technically there's a 4th, there's raptors with a slightly different coat of paint. A boss fight with a rampaging triceratops would have been a great scene, and in a remake, that is the top of my list. This assumes that Capcom doesn't pull their usual, "Hey, remember this thing we own? Well, now it's a costume in that money pit we call Street Fighter V!" Because that stunt never gets old. Either way, check it out. I believe you can find it on the US PSN store for $5.99. Kind of a bargain. If you want to get the Dreamcast version, it's a bit more expensive, but I just like Dreamcast. Either way, good night, sleep tight, and don't let the raptors bite. Especially not that one.